You know, the generation has changed in 10 years. Because think about it, if you talk to someone...
Beyond the TV, cameras, and the dramatic music of Moonshiners lies the real story of Tim Smith, a man who took an old secret mountain craft and, with resilience, turned it into his life's work. But behind the jars of shine, the smiles, and the fame, there's also a story of hardship, of battles fought in silence, of heartbreaks the world never fully saw. In today's video, we'll uncover the life and struggles of Tim Smith and how his journey became both a story of survival and sacrifice. Roots of a moonshiner. When people talk about the legacy of moonshining in America, one name always comes up: Tim Smith. He stands as one of the most unforgettable figures in this age-old tradition. But his story is not only about brewing corn whiskey in hidden barns or backwoods stills. It is a story of survival, family heritage, clashes with law enforcement, and the personal tragedies that shaped the man he eventually became. Tim Smith was born in the tiny town of Climax, Virginia, a place so small you could pass through without even noticing, yet rich with history, and filled with tales of men who risked everything to make and move liquor during Prohibition and beyond. From his earliest days, Tim saw his father and grandfather running stills deep in the woods, carrying on a craft that had been part of his bloodline since before the 1920s, when America had gone dry. To the outside world, moonshiners were criminals, but to their neighbors, they were lifelines, men who defied the law to keep spirits alive. Growing up in this world meant hard work was not a choice, but a way of life. Tim learned how to repair an old truck before he was even old enough to drive, how to haul corn sacks nearly as heavy as his own body before the age of 10, and most importantly, how moonshine was not simply about drinking, it was about survival. It paid the bills, put food on the table, and kept clothes on their backs. But tragedy shadowed his childhood. While other kids dreamed of baseball or college, Tim was living with the constant fear of federal raids. He watched his family bury copper steel parts in the dirt, heard whispers about who had been caught, and saw neighbors sent to jail. To him, these weren't distant stories. They were daily reminders of how fragile life in Climax could be. In Climax, moonshining wasn't just an occupation. It was an identity. It was pride. Tim grew up listening to his grandfather's vivid tales of revenuers storming through with axes, smashing barrels, while men scattered into the woods with rifles and barking dogs. These weren't bedtime stories. They were warnings, teaching Tim how to be tough, how to endure, and how to keep running even when the law closed in. One of the first turning points in his life came in the late 1970s. His father narrowly escaped being caught in a raid that could have landed him behind bars for years. Tim was still a boy, but he remembers the panic in his mother's eyes as government trucks rolled up and boots crunched against gravel. That night, the family poured out an entire batch of shine into the dirt to avoid arrest. For young Tim, watching all their hard work vanish was devastating. Later, he admitted this moment taught him that moonshining wasn't just about distilling, it was about secrecy, strategy, and learning how to outwit men with more power and resources. By the time he reached his teenage years, Tim had already mastered the trade. He could build a still from scratch, test alcohol proof by watching the bubbles rise in a shaken jar, and transport liquor through back roads without being caught. Yet, the price of the trade was heavy. He saw friends and relatives die in car wrecks while running from the law, others shot in territorial disputes, and some who drank too much of their own product and destroyed their lives. The irony of Tim's journey came when he joined the fire department as a young man. By day, he dedicated his life to saving others, rushing into burning houses. By night, he carried the secret life of a moonshiner, working in the shadows. It was almost poetic. One man, split between protecting lives and breaking the law. The 1980s and 1990s brought little relief. Rural Virginia's economy was harsh, and families leaned on old traditions to survive. Tim's mother tried to push him away from moonshining, warning him against the jail cells that had trapped so many before. But roots run deep, and to Tim, leaving the family trade behind would have felt like turning his back on who he was. By the early 2000s, moonshining had taken on a new meaning in America. It was no longer just an illegal craft hidden away in the hills. It had become a symbol of rebellion, of Southern grit, and of heritage. So when Discovery Channel launched Moonshiners in 2011, Tim Smith became one of its central figures. Overnight, his secret world was exposed to millions, and a once-hidden culture stepped into the spotlight. The weight of fame and fire.
So I'm curious, did everybody...
By the time Tim Smith walked into the limelight with Moonshiners, hardship was nothing new to him. Fame might have brought cameras and crowds, but it never erased the scars of his past. Viewers saw a man cracking jokes and smiling on TV, but behind that easy laugh was someone who had buried friends too soon, someone who had waited long nights to hear if a buddy survived a wreck while hauling liquor, someone who had stood silent watching people he loved dragged off in handcuffs. For Tim, grief never stopped knocking, even when the lights of fame were shining on him. The first seasons of Moonshiners were bittersweet. On one hand, he was finally being celebrated for the craft he had learned as a boy, shaking hands with fans, signing autographs, and becoming a household name. On the other hand, television glamorized something that was still dangerous, still illegal, and very much alive in backwoods communities. Tim knew that every laugh on camera was also drawing sharper eyes from law enforcement. For a man who had spent his entire life trying to avoid trouble, that was a heavy price to pay. The pressure was relentless. The network wanted drama. The audience wanted action. But Tim had to live the reality, protecting his crew, keeping secrets off camera, and making sure the wrong detail didn't land someone behind bars. To the public, he was entertainment. To himself, he was walking a tightrope where every slip came with consequences. And beyond the TV set, Tim still had to go home. Back in Climax, he was not just a star. He was a husband, a father, and a neighbor. People whispered about the show, speculated about what was real, and worried every time a siren echoed through the hills. His fame became a double-edged sword. With recognition came criticism, especially from old-timers who thought he had sold out the tradition, exposing a culture that was meant to stay hidden. Some accused him of disrespecting the craft, but Tim insisted he wanted to honor it, to show the world that moonshiners were not just criminals, but hard-working men with families, pride, and history. Amid all of this, Tim was chasing a dream bigger than TV, going legal. He wanted to bottle his father's recipe and put Climax Moonshine on shelves beside the biggest whiskey brands. But turning an outlaw trade into a legitimate business meant facing endless government paperwork, regulations, and taxes, the very system that had always been against him. It also meant facing anger from those who felt moonshine should stay in the woods, not sit neatly labeled in liquor stores. Still, after years of hiding, the day his jars officially hit the shelves was a moment of triumph, proof that his family's legacy had stepped into the light. But success came at a cost. Legalizing the business drained money, created fights, and brought sleepless nights filled with doubts. There were times Tim wondered if he had taken on too much, balancing TV demands, a new business, and family responsibilities. At the same time, tragedy kept circling. Friends from the trade were getting arrested, falling sick, or losing themselves to addiction. Some he could help, many he could not, and that burden stayed with him. His fire service career was no less heavy. Being a firefighter meant living with risk, with daily reminders of loss. For Tim, the hardest calls were those involving children, moments that cut deep into him as a father. He often said firefighting made him value life more, but also showed him how fragile it really was. That knowledge drove him even harder to carve a future where moonshining was something his son could be proud of, not something to hide. As Moonshiners grew into a cultural hit, Tim found himself recognized everywhere. People saw Tim the Moonshiner, Tim the TV star, Tim, the face of Climax Moonshine. But they rarely saw the man who longed for quiet, who sometimes just wanted to sit in peace after filming, to feel like a regular guy again. Fame can feel like a spotlight, but for Tim Smith, it often felt more like a cage. Shadows, strain, and silent goodbyes.
At a good price? With Climax Moonshine, you know, one of the ingredients is malted barley.
As the years rolled on and the cameras kept capturing his every move, it became clear that Tim Smith was carrying far more than the audience could ever see. Fame never smoothed his path, it only made the load heavier. Now the pressure wasn't just about dodging lawmen, it was about protecting his family, keeping his reputation intact, holding his business together, and making sure the legacy of his father and grandfather wasn't cheapened into something fake. Tim often spoke about how television brought a new kind of intrusion into his life. Strangers began showing up in Climax. Tourists rode through town hunting for him. Reporters knocked with endless questions. And some even tried sneaking onto his property in hopes of snapping photos of stills. For a man raised on secrecy, this was nerve-wracking. He put up fences, installed cameras, and grew more cautious than ever, because now thousands of eyes were waiting for him to slip. Off camera, the sacrifices were heavier still. Nights when he came home too drained to speak. Family events missed because filming or business had to come first. Times when he had to look his loved ones in the eye and promise just one more season. Fame gives, but it also takes. And for Tim, the cost was steep. The hardest blow came with the death of his father. It wasn't just losing a parent, it was losing the man who had taught him everything, who had stood firm beside him when the law was on their heels, and who believed their family tradition mattered. Tim said it felt like the air went out of the room and never fully came back. He kept filming, kept working, but there was an emptiness. His drive to succeed legally burned even hotter then. He wanted the Smith name to stand for more than police reports and raids. Over the years, his body also began showing the toll. Decades of firefighting, constant stress, and the sheer grind of carrying two lives at once left scars on his health. Slowing down didn't come easy to Tim. He was used to being the one in control, fixing problems, lifting the heaviest loads. Admitting he couldn't do it all cut deep. Another painful truth was watching how the moonshine culture itself changed. In his youth, it was secret, sacred, passed from father to son. After moonshiners became a phenomenon, suddenly everyone wanted in. Tourists snapped photos, hobbyists built backyard stills, and the once hidden tradition became a spectacle. For Tim, that was bittersweet. Moonshine had never been fun and games to him. It was survival, the thing that kept his family fed when winters were long and work was scarce. Through all of this, Tim never left the fire department. That decision alone spoke volumes. He could have walked away when fame and money arrived, but he kept putting on the uniform, answering emergency calls, and standing face to face with real tragedy. He still pulled people from wrecks, still entered burning homes, still comforted families who lost everything. And then, sometimes on the very same day, he had to smile for cameras and play the role of entertainer. That double life weighed like lead. There were moments when the strain almost broke him. He thought about vanishing into the woods and leaving it all behind. But Tim was not built to quit. He kept pushing forward, tired, doubted, burdened, but unbroken. The sharpest pain came with the loss of friends. Within the Moonshiners family, many fell to addiction, prison, or death. Each one left a scar on Tim's heart. He once admitted that moonshining saved his life and almost ruined it at the same time. That single line captures it all, the tragedy and the triumph. It gave him purpose, heritage, and pride, but it also made him a target, cost him people he loved, and nearly cost him his freedom more times than he could count. The legacy and the burden of a name.
I didn't think we'd get here. I thought we was gonna wind up dumping all the mash out, but now we got...
There is an emotional layer to Tim Smith's life that fans rarely see. Fame often tricks people into believing they truly know you, and it gives them permission, at least in their minds, to say whatever they want. For Tim, that meant dealing with harsh words, false rumors, and endless gossip. He was accused of selling out, of staging things for television, of turning a serious, sacred way of life into a spectacle. He brushed it off in public, but deep down, those words cut. He kept working, kept smiling for the cameras, yet if you looked close enough, there was always something in his eyes, a quiet pain that spoke of decades filled with danger, loss, and relentless pressure. Today, when you see Tim Smith, you are looking at a man who has lived more in one lifetime than most ever will. That smile on his face was not handed to him. It was carved through hardship, tragedy, and sheer determination. Tim is no longer just the boy from Climax sneaking jars through the woods. He is now a husband, a father, a businessman, a firefighter, and the unlikely face of an entire tradition handed down through generations. As Moonshiners grew into one of Discovery's most watched shows year after year, Tim became something larger than himself. Millions looked to him not only for entertainment, but also as a voice for a culture that refused to die. He carried that responsibility, speaking for small towns like Climax, for families still relying on moonshining to survive, for men and women who could still piece together a still from scraps. But carrying that mantle was exhausting. For someone raised in secrecy and privacy, having the weight of a culture on your shoulders is no easy task. Tim now walks a line between two worlds. On one side, he has dragged moonshine into the legal market, bottled, labeled, and sold in stores where it once would have been smashed to the ground by federal agents. That achievement is monumental, something many believed would never happen. Yet, on the other side, he still feels the ghost of the past. He remembers the smell of mash cooking in the woods, the thrill of evading headlights on a dark road, the sound of boots crunching on gravel during a raid. Even though he's legal now, part of him still glances over his shoulder. At the center of it all, his family has been his anchor. His wife stood with him through the lean years when illegal shine was their only income, through the chaos when cameras first arrived, and through the sleepless nights when he feared the business might collapse. She witnessed the toll it took, the exhaustion after firehouse calls, the stress etched on his face when critics came down hard, and the financial struggles that nearly broke him. But she never left. Being a father, Tim says, is what grounds him most. With a son watching his every move, he could no longer think only of himself. He had to think about the kind of example he set, the name he was building, and the legacy he would leave behind. One of the biggest reasons he fought so hard to go legal was because he didn't want his boy to grow up in the same fear he once did, wondering if tonight was the night his father might be taken away. Breaking that cycle, giving his son a future without that shadow, became his mission. The climb was brutal. There were times when the business nearly went under. Tim had to borrow, bargain, and fight every step of the way against a liquor industry dominated by massive corporations who didn't want small distillers gaining ground. He spent long hours traveling, worked deals that fell apart, and faced stress heavy enough to break most men. Add to that the pressure of cameras, fans expecting smiles, and critics waiting for failure, and it became almost unbearable. He has been candid about the toll. There were nights he felt burned out, nights when all he wanted was to sit in the woods, listen to crickets, and remember peace. But he kept going. His father had drilled one lesson into him: get back up every time life knocks you down. And that's what Tim did, again and again. In later seasons, fans began to see more of his softer side, the worry, the reflection, the grief. He had lost too many friends along the way, some to accidents, some to addiction, some to illness. Each loss cut deep because these weren't just co-stars. They were family, men who lived the same risks and carried the same scars. Those losses reminded him that moonshine was always more than jars of liquor. It was risk, survival, and danger wrapped together. Perhaps the most emotional truth Tim has ever shared is how every time he runs a still, he feels his father's presence. He can almost hear his voice saying, "Do it right or don't do it at all." That bond is unshakable, both comforting and heartbreaking. It captures what his story is all about. Moonshining isn't just a business or a show, it is blood, memory, and love woven together. Despite the pain, Tim has used his platform to give back, supporting charities, speaking to young people, and proving that it is possible to turn something outlawed into something legitimate through sheer will. In that way, his life story has become much bigger than moonshine. It is about redemption, about carrying scars without letting them define you, and about finding light even in the darkest corners of the past. Tim Smith's journey is more than just the story of a moonshiner turned TV star. It's about survival, resilience, and the power of family. From the backwoods of Climax to the shelves of legal liquor stores, his path has been anything but easy. Yet through all the struggles, criticism, and sleepless nights, Tim continues to stand tall, carrying his father's lessons, his community's traditions, and his own unshakable determination. But now we want to hear from you. What do you think about Tim's journey? Do you believe he's managed to honor his roots while stepping into the modern world? Or do you feel the price of fame has been too high? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Before you go, check out the other videos on your screen. We've got plenty more stories just like this one waiting for you. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay inspired.